I was given this power washer that was seized up, and so first thing I did was isolate whether the lockup was from an internal engine problem or the pump. And since the pump rotated freely, I tore into the engine. This video is not intended to be a step-by-step guide for a complete engine rebuild on a specific engine, but rather something that will hopefully pique your curiosity and get you diving into a motor that you suspect has internal mechanical problems to learn a thing or two from it. You can get in over your head pretty quick, but you have an engine like this that's fairly inexpensive. It's worth tearing into for the education of it. And that's what I do here is I take this engine off of this cart and dump the oil out of it and get into the internals of it to see why it was locked up. And it turned out that it had a connecting rod to the crankshaft that had kind of seized on there. I put on a pneumatic or an impact gun and turned the crank by hand and got the piston to turn, but it was really tight. And so after I tore into it, I found out that that connecting rod basically had seized onto the crankshaft. So this engine's pretty soft and pretty disposable, really. Not great engine to rebuild. You can't do much as far as bore out the cylinder if it's badly grooved or something like that. There's not even any rod bearings. It's just the connecting rod aluminum itself that goes onto the crank. So, but you can buy a new piston and a connecting rod for it. And since the crankshaft was still good and the damage was on the connecting rod itself, because that's the soft part, and the cylinder wasn't too bad, it did have a couple of grooves, but I felt okay about putting a new piston in it. So I ordered, looked up, the model number and all that stuff, and was able to find a piston and a connecting rod with some new rings. And so I cleaned everything up and put those in and was able to get this power washer going. Again, I wouldn't invest a lot of money or effort into, an inexpensive power washer like this, but I was able to get my connecting rod and piston and all the parts for around $60. With these aluminum connecting rods, and you can dissolve that aluminum with some muriatic acid. And so that was painted on there, and until that all dissolved off, and then checked the crank for round, and it was still fine. So felt good about going back on with the new connecting rod and piston. Oiling things up as we're reassembling, following directions for how they want you to put the piston rings on there, and then put it all back together. You can look up the torque specs and things online. For bolts, Briggs and Stratton engines, you just put in, what horsepower it is, and most of those torque specs are pretty universal, and they'll work across the board. Same with like valve clearance and stuff like that to when you check that at the end. So again, this is hopefully just something to stimulate your curiosity a little bit, and maybe you can tear into your engine, and even if you don't get it rebuilt, you'll learn a thing or two. This is, the timing gears to run the valves off the crankshaft. It's got a plastic timing gear going onto the camshaft and a plastic governor, so pretty inexpensive motor. And that putting some Loctite on things as we reassemble. And we reassembled it here on the bench instead of on the cart. It's easier. I should have done that when I took it off the cart, just took the whole thing off and took everything off there on the bench. But it's I guess the outcome's the same. But reassembled everything here on the cart, and then adjust and valve clearance, and then we'll be able to put the whole thing on there. The magnetic pickup here, kind of a trick for that is you can take a plain card and put that between the magnetic pickup for the spark pickup and the flywheel magnets there, or the pickup on the flywheel, and that's about the right spacing before you tighten that down. Once we get it all together, we'll put it on, start it up, and make sure it's going to work okay, and then we'll run it under a load, power washing with it for a few hours, and then change the oil on it. For a soft engine like this, you really want to stay ahead of oil changes. Do it often. I would say, you use it a couple of times pretty hard, dump the oil on it, and put new stuff in, and you'll, an inexpensive motor like this or engine can last you quite a while if you'll take care of it like that. That first oil change had a little bit of metal in it with the break-in. Like I say, pretty soft motor, and I'll be changing the oil frequently on it and keeping it in good shape. But I've been happy with it, and it's working good. Thanks for watching. I hope you like and subscribe.